March of 2023. Picture a mid-sized retailer doing what a lot of retailers do, pulling point-of-sale data, watching the usual trends, trusting the seasonal models. And then something weird shows up. One product category starts dropping faster than it should. Not a tiny wobble. A real signal. The analytics team flags it in the weekly report. The insight is there. It's accurate. It's actionable. And then, it just sits. For days in an inbox before anyone important opens it. Another week to get the category team in a room. They go back and forth. Is it noise? Is it a one-off? They ask for more cuts of the data. 2 more weeks drift by. And by the time they finally move, they're 7 weeks past the first signal. The decision, when it arrives, is straightforward. Discount inventory. Shift shelf space. Change purchasing. But the timing is brutal. They end up liquidating $4.2 million of inventory at a 60% loss. Here's the part that hurts. The post-mortem says if they'd acted in week 1, the hit would have been under $800,000. Same data. Same signal. Just a different speed. That gap between when you could have known and when you finally decide, that's what we're calling intelligence debt. And just like financial debt, it has interest. It grows. It compounds. Today we're going to put numbers on it, talk about why it piles up, and share how the fastest organizations are paying it down. I'm Na-kel Nikiema, and this is the Intelligence Edge. Alright, joining me today is a 4-person panel, because decision speed looks different depending on where you sit. We've got strategy, governance, compliance, and systems. Let's bring them in. Dr. Lian Zhou is an AI transformation leader across Asia-Pacific, working in markets where waiting can mean you lose the whole category. Dr. Zhou, welcome back.
Thanks, Na-kel. This is one of those topics that shows up in almost every transformation I've been part of.
Maria Alvarez is a data governance leader across Latin America. And Maria's seen the good, the bad, and the painfully slow when it comes to governance. Maria, great to have you.
Happy to be here. And yes, governance can either be a superpower or a speed trap.
Jonas Richter is a data ethics and compliance specialist based in Europe. Jonas helps organizations move fast without stepping into a regulatory landmine. Jonas, welcome.
Thanks, Na-kel. I like the framing today because a lot of people think speed and compliance are enemies. They don't have to be.
And Kwame Mensah is an intelligence systems architect who's built decision infrastructure across Africa, in environments where latency isn't just expensive, it can literally be existential. Kwame, good to have you back.
Good to be back. I'm excited for this one because people underestimate how measurable this really is.
Let's ground the term first. When you hear intelligence debt, what does it mean to you? No jargon contest here, just your clean definition. Dr. Zhou, start us off.
To me, intelligence debt is the cost you accumulate when you postpone a decision even though the information you need is already there. It's a lot like technical debt in software. You take a shortcut or you delay a fix, and later you pay more. With decisions, the delay creates future losses, and those losses grow over time.
Maria, from the governance angle.
Na-kel, I think of it as a tax on your organization caused by friction. Extra approvals that don't add safety. Confusing ownership. Meetings that exist because nobody trusts the last meeting. The initial delay is like the principal, and then all the downstream consequences are the interest.
Jonas, where does ethics and compliance fit into the definition?
I broaden it a bit. Intelligence debt includes delayed decisions you know you need to make, but also the decisions you don't even realize you should be making. If your systems aren't surfacing the signals, then you're accumulating debt silently. You're paying interest on risks you haven't identified yet.
And Kwame, build it for me like an engineer.
I think of it as the gap between theoretical decision speed and actual decision speed. In other words, how fast you could decide if everything was frictionless versus how long it really takes. That delta is the debt, and the goal is to shrink it until the real world looks a lot more like the theoretical best case.
Different lenses, same theme, the debt is real, it's measurable, and the bill gets bigger the longer you wait. So let's actually quantify the bill. When leaders hear this, they often ask, okay, but can I put this in a spreadsheet? Can we attach dollars to decision delay? Kwame, you're the measurement guy here. How do you break down decision latency?
We usually split it into 3 chunks. First is signal to insight, how long it takes from data being generated to an insight becoming available. That's mostly pipelines, processing, model runtime. Second is insight to decision. Once the insight exists, how long until someone actually commits to a choice? That's routing, ownership, authority, approvals. This is where most organizations lose weeks. Third is decision to action. After you've chosen, how long until reality changes? That's execution. Workflows, system integration, operational capacity.
So it's not just, did we have analytics? It's the whole chain from signal to impact.
Exactly. And the funny part is, the data side is often the smallest slice. Companies will spend millions shaving hours off data processing while leaving the organizational part as a multi-week bottleneck.
Give me a real example with numbers.
Manufacturing supply chain. A demand sensing system picked up a supplier quality issue that would create a component shortage. Signal to insight was about 6 hours. Great. But then the insight didn't go to an owner with authority. It went to a report. That report waited for a weekly meeting. The meeting said, "This looks important," and created a task force. Then they met again. Then they decided to qualify an alternative supplier. That took 23 days from insight to decision. And then decision to action, including qualification, contracting, and first shipment, was 47 more days. All in, 70 days from signal to action.
70 days is basically a whole season in some industries.
Right. And during those 70 days they ran short, missed commitments, paid expediting fees, and damaged 2 key customer relationships. We quantified the cost at $2.8 million. We redesigned the flow. Same type of signal now triggers suggested alternative sourcing options in front of a named owner, with a 48-hour response SLA. New total latency was 4 days. When a similar issue hit 6 months later, it was about $180,000 instead of millions.
Dr. Zhou, do you see this kind of great model, slow humans, dynamic in APAC?
All the time, and in fast-moving markets the penalty can be even harsher. One example, a regional bank with fraud models that were genuinely strong. High precision, not noisy. But from fraud alert to account action, the average turnaround was 72 hours.
3 days is forever in fraud.
Exactly. In that window, a sophisticated operation can drain the account, move funds through multiple channels, and disappear. Their fraud losses were more than 3 times the industry benchmark, and it wasn't because detection was worse. Response was slower. When we mapped it, about 12 hours sat in model inference and alert generation. 60 hours sat in queues, escalation, approvals. We changed the decision design, high-confidence alerts triggered an automatic temporary hold, and humans reviewed to release rather than to act. Latency dropped under 4 hours, and fraud losses dropped 58% in the first quarter.
Maria, you've argued governance itself can create debt. Can you quantify it without just saying, too many meetings?
Yes, and you have to, otherwise governance teams get defensive and nothing changes. We did an audit for a multinational consumer goods company in Latin America. We looked at one decision type, reallocating marketing spend after a recommendation is available. Average time from recommendation ready to money deployed was 34 days. Then we mapped every step. Some steps were legitimate work. Data validation and quality checks took about 3 days. Fine. But then preparing the deck and documentation took 4 days, mostly formatting, not thinking. Then the real killer, waiting for the governance committee meeting. They met every 2 weeks, so that created an 8-day wait on average. Discussion wasn't long, but questions spilled into a second meeting. Then a regional VP approval sat for 6 days because it was buried in an inbox. Finance confirmation took 5 days. Legal review took 4 days and was usually a rubber stamp. Implementation took 3 days. When we added it up, we found 17 days that were basically calendar friction. Not effort, not analysis, just waiting.
17 days of nothing is happening but time is passing.
Exactly. And when your annual marketing spend is $17 million, deploying it 17 days late is not neutral. We estimated about $2.3 million a year in lost effectiveness based on how campaign returns diminish when timing slips.
Jonas, people hear compliance and think, well, that's the reason we can't move. What do you say to that?
Sometimes compliance is adding latency, yes. But I'd ask a different question. What's the cost of moving fast the wrong way? I worked with a financial institution that looked slower than a competitor because they built compliance review into their process. The competitor launched faster, skipped friction, and within 18 months faced regulatory action and remediation costs plus reputational damage totaling about 340 million euros. So the slow institution looked very smart when you include avoided losses. That said, we can engineer compliance for speed. Pre-approved frameworks, embedded rules, and human review mainly for exceptions.
So it's not compliance versus speed, it's compliance design determines speed.
Exactly. The goal is compliance at business speed, not forcing the business to crawl at the pace of a poorly designed compliance queue.
Alright, let me push the math angle. If I'm a CEO or CFO, can I model intelligence debt like a number I track?
You can model it, at least in a simplified way. One approach is, intelligence debt equals decision latency times how often the decision happens times the value at risk per decision. So if you have a decision that happens weekly, it takes 15 days longer than it should, and each instance has $50,000 at stake, you can estimate the annual cost. Even if it's rough, it's eye-opening.
The point isn't perfect precision, it's prioritization.
Exactly. Do this across your top 20 recurring decisions, and you'll immediately see which delays are quietly costing you millions.
And I'd add, there's often a cascade effect. Many decisions are linked. Delay a root decision and you don't just lose time on that one decision, you push back a whole chain. In interdependent systems like supply chains or real-time operations, a cascade multiplier can be 3 to 10 times.
So one day late at the start can become weeks late down the line.
Exactly.
Now that we've made the cost real, let's talk about why this happens. Why do organizations, even smart ones, keep letting decisions drift? Maria, you've mapped these processes. What repeat patterns show up?
I see 5 root causes constantly. Number 1 is unclear decision ownership. If nobody is clearly accountable, the insight bounces between teams. Marketing says it's sales. Sales says it's finance. Finance says it needs legal. Everyone is involved, nobody acts. Second is consensus addiction. Some cultures treat every decision like it requires unanimous agreement. Consensus can be valuable, but universal consensus for routine decisions creates built-in slowness. Third is data distrust. When leaders don't trust the data, they stall and ask for one more analysis, one more source, one more validation. Governance failures upstream become latency downstream. Fourth is authority mismatch. The person closest to the information often doesn't have the authority to decide, so everything has to travel upward and then come back down. And fifth is meeting dependency. Decisions chain to calendars. If a committee meets monthly and you miss the agenda cutoff, congratulations, Your decision now takes 30 days no matter how urgent it is.
Dr. Zhou, do you see different root causes depending on the market?
The categories are similar, but culture changes what dominates. In highly hierarchical organizations, authority mismatch is huge. There are formal approval circulation processes designed for risk control and consensus, but they create structural latency. In faster, more operationally empowered environments, the bottleneck isn't always approvals. Sometimes it's unclear strategy, shifting priorities, or middle managers drowning in decisions, too many choices coming at them with no clear direction on what matters most.
Jonas, does compliance introduce its own unique delays?
Compliance often gets blamed for delays that are actually integration problems. If compliance is a gate that reviews decisions after the business has already decided, you'll create queues and frustration. But if compliance is embedded as criteria upfront, most decisions can move without human review. Where I do see compliance-induced latency is ambiguity. People don't know whether a decision needs review, so they ask just in case. The queue grows. Everyone waits. The fix is clarity. Decision matrices. This type of decision is pre-approved within parameters. This type requires review. This type requires escalation. When people know the rules, they stop waiting for permission they don't actually need.
Kwame, what about the technical side? Because people love to blame tools too.
There are technical root causes, definitely. First, batch processing in a world that needs real time. If you run critical analytics overnight, you've built in a full day of debt every day. Second, push versus pull. If insights live in dashboards and inboxes, they wait for someone to go looking. But when you design alerting so the insight finds the owner, latency drops. Third, siloed systems. Insight in System A, decision in System B, action in System C, humans become the integration layer. Export, interpret, re-enter. Those swivel chair steps add time and errors.
If you had to pick the biggest contributor overall, what wins?
Organization. Tech delays are often hours. Organizational delays are weeks. If you only modernize the data stack, you might get a 10% improvement. If you redesign ownership and decision flow, you can cut 70%.
And inside organization, ownership is the big one. I've seen 2 days of actual work take 40 days of calendar time because nobody knew who was supposed to do those 2 days.
That's why the decision layer isn't really a pure technology initiative. It's organizational design, with technology as an accelerator.
Okay. We've said the word debt a lot. Let's talk about what makes it debt-like, compounding. How does waiting today make the cost explode later? Jonas, you touched on the idea of decisions you don't even know you owe. Walk us through how compounding looks in a risk context.
Think about early risk signals. Patterns and complaints, a supplier slowly becoming unstable, subtle regulatory shifts in neighboring markets. If you catch that early and decide early, you have options. You can adjust gradually, hedge, exit slowly, negotiate from strength. If you catch it late or you catch it early but decide late, your options shrink. Now you're reacting. You pay urgency premiums. Other parties can see you're rushed. Cost multiplies. And if you don't detect it until it's a crisis, you're not optimizing anymore. You're doing damage control. That's the compounding. Same underlying issue, wildly different cost depending on when you decide.
Kwame, give us something concrete where the math gets cruel.
Agricultural supply chains in East Africa. Using weather data, satellite imagery, and farmer reports, we can spot crop failure risk 4 to 6 weeks before harvest. At that point, you can intervene. Irrigation support, pest treatment, sometimes even replanting. Roughly $40 per hectare. And the success rate can be around 65%. If you detect the same issue 2 to 3 weeks out, you're in emergency mode. Costs jump to around $120 per hectare, and success drops to maybe 30%. If you wait until harvest failure, the crop is gone. The decision becomes mitigation, insurance, alternative sourcing, support, logistics disruption. And here's the trap: early signals are uncertain. Late signals are certain. Many organizations wait for certainty, and they unknowingly choose the most expensive timeline.
That's such a good point. People confuse certainty with wisdom, but sometimes certainty is just, it's too late to do anything but pay.
That shows up in strategy too. Market opportunities have windows. Early movers get lower acquisition costs, better partnerships, and they shape expectations. If you decide in 30 days, you can be early. If you take 90, you're in the pack and costs double. If you take 180, you're late, costs can quadruple, and your market share ceiling shrinks. I've watched leadership teams analyze something until the environment changes. Then the decision is no longer about capturing opportunity, it's about whether you can afford to enter at a disadvantage.
Maria, you've got a unique angle here: data quality problems compounding into decision remediation. Say more.
This is the sneaky one. If you have a data quality issue and you don't know it, your dashboards might look confident while being wrong. So you're not just making one bad decision. You're stacking decisions on top of a bad foundation. Then when the issue is discovered, the question becomes, which decisions over the last year or two were impacted? Which ones can you undo? Which ones have already triggered other moves? I've seen pricing decisions over an 18-month period become suspect because of a data integrity problem. The direct cost was bad enough, but unwinding it, reanalyzing, and rebuilding the decision logic was 5 times the direct cost. That's the interest payment. That's the compounding.
So let's get practical. If intelligence debt is the problem, what actually pays it down? And not in theory, but in ways leaders can implement. Dr. Zhou, start with organizational interventions. What moves the needle most?
3 things. First, clarify decision rights. For recurring decisions, assign a named owner and define their authority boundaries. That alone can cut organizational latency almost in half. Second, escalate by exception. Decisions should be made closest to the information by default. Only escalate when you cross defined risk or cost thresholds. Third, set a decision tempo. Some decisions deserve long deliberation. Most do not. Put explicit time expectations on categories. Pricing adjustments, 48 hours. Competitive responses, 24. Strategic partnerships, a 30-day window with milestones.
Tempo is huge, because if you don't set it, time expands.
Exactly. Decisions fill the time you give them.
Maria, how do you make governance a guardrail instead of a traffic jam?
Pre-approval. Instead of reviewing every decision, governance defines the boundaries where teams are already approved to act. So for marketing reallocation, for example, if you stay under certain amounts, within brand rules, in approved markets, you can move immediately. If you want to go outside those parameters, then yes, escalate. That flips governance from gatekeeping to guardrails. We used this approach and took that 34-day marketing decision latency down to 6 days, without lowering standards. Same risk control, smarter design.
Jonas, what does compliance look like when it's designed for speed?
3 principles again. First, compliance by design, not compliance by after-the-fact review. If rules are embedded in the system, some options simply don't exist, and thresholds automatically trigger requirements. Second, tiered review by risk. Low-risk decisions should fly through. Medium risk can be automated checks with spot audits. High risk gets full review. Most decisions are low risk, so design for the majority. Third, SLAs for compliance. If review is needed, it has a turnaround commitment. 24 hours for standard, 4 hours for urgent with clear criteria. Compliance is an operational function, can be staffed and measured like one.
Kwame, bring it home on the technical side. What's worth doing first?
Move critical signals from batch to real-time or near real-time. Not everything needs streaming, but decision-critical signals do. Then shift from pull to push. Don't rely on someone opening a dashboard. Build alerting routes to the decision owner with relevance and deadlines. Then integrate systems to remove swivel chair steps. If insight lives in analytics, decision happens in workflow, and action happens in operations. Connect them so humans aren't copying and pasting reality across tools. And one more, build decision interfaces, not just dashboards. Don't just show the insight. Provide approve, reject, modify, and implement paths so people can complete the decision in the moment.
Let me ask the uncomfortable question. Can an organization get addicted to speed? Can you go too fast?
Absolutely. Speed without direction is chaos. And not every decision should be fast. If it's irreversible and long-term, it deserves time. The trick is matching velocity to decision type.
Also, speed has a quality floor. A fast wrong decision can be worse than a slower correct one. The best organizations define what good enough means for each decision category. They don't overthink decisions that meet the bar, and they don't rush decisions that don't.
And you have to measure outcomes. If you speed up decisions but never check whether faster decisions improved results, you might just scale mistakes. Velocity and feedback loops go together.
Alright, let's close with what we call the tactical edge. One concrete move each listener can take this week. No massive transformation program. Just one action. Dr. Zhou, you're up.
Pick your 3 most important recurring decisions and map the latency end-to-end, signal to insight, insight to decision, decision to action. Put real numbers on it. Once you can see the delays, you'll know exactly where your debt is.
Maria.
Find one decision that currently requires a committee, and redesign it with pre-approved parameters. Define the boundaries, name the owner, and remove one meeting dependency. Then do it again with the next decision.
Jonas.
Create a compliance SLA for one decision category. 24 or 48 hours. Make it explicit, staff for it, and measure it. Prove internally that compliance can run at business speed.
Kwame.
Take one insight that currently lives passively in a dashboard and turn it into a push alert. Assign a clear decision owner and a deadline. Experience the difference between information available and decision happening.
Let's tie it all together. Intelligence debt is what you rack up when a decision arrives after the moment it could have created value or prevented loss. And the reason it's called debt is because it compounds. Signals ignored become crises managed. Options shrink as time passes. The cost of delay multiplies the farther you drift from the optimal decision point. And the big takeaway today is that most of this isn't a technology problem. The largest delays are organizational, unclear ownership, consensus overload, authority mismatches, meeting-driven decisions. Tech helps, but design is where the debt is created and where it's eliminated. Paying down the debt looks like clear decision rights, guardrail-style governance, compliance built into the workflow, real-time where it matters, and intelligence that pushes to owners instead of waiting to be pulled. And one last warning, moving faster without measuring outcomes is just moving faster. The best organizations pair decision velocity with rigorous feedback, so speed translates into better results, not just more activity. Dr. Lien Zhou, Maria Alvarez, Jonas Richter, and Kwame Mensah, thank you for this. Truly.
Thank you, Na-kel.
Great conversation. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Na-kel. This one matters.
Next week on the Intelligence Edge, the CFO's new mandate, from scorekeeper to strategist. We'll talk about how finance is shifting from reporting the past to powering forward-looking decisions, and what that means for the executive team. Until then, I'm Na-kel Nikiema. Make better decisions.